Hello everyone. Welcome to season two of the Dialexicon podcast, a channel targeted to the youth where we critically engage with leading scholars and connect philosophy to contemporary social issues, all at a digestible level. My name is Rohan, and this week we are joined by Dr. Jennifer Chien. Dr. Chien is a postdoctoral embedded ethics fellow in partnership with the Institute of Human-Centered AI as well as the Computer Science Department at Stanford University. They also hold a PhD in computer science from the University of California in San Diego. Hi, Dr. Chen. How are you today?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm great. So,
Good to hear.
before we get into some of your work, I would love to know what your story is academically, and sort of any personal experiences that you can recount about how you got into this field of AI ethics.
Yeah, so probably a big question. I was very much pushed by my parents to be in STEM. I mean, I was certainly interested in many other things, but I was also very good and interested in STEM in high school and in middle school and all these other things. Growing up, I went to lots of like math camps and science camps and other things like that. Um, in college, I went to a liberal arts college. I went to Wellesley,
Mhm.
which is a super awesome women's college. Um, but that definitely, like, in being at a liberal arts college, they encourage you to take classes outside of just like your core major. So I was taking linguistics as alongside Chinese class, alongside um, all of the computer science classes that I was taking. So it was very easy for me to see a lot of the connections of how
Mhm.
everything is really not so far like differentiated like
Sure.
domain wise or discipline wise. I felt like everything really was
Yeah.
like playing together. Um, and I was always interested in less of the theory of computer science, but more of the applications to the real world. So, how people took like building a search engine to be something that touched the real world and shaped how people understood the world, things like
Mhm.
that. And so I was first drawn to computer science mostly because I just happened to be good at it. I think it was like as a very logical person, it was like or someone who was raised very logically.
Yeah.
It was pretty intuitive for me to follow and kind of pick up, which was I was very lucky for that. Um, but I think I was still interested in doing stuff that was very much like very tangible. So
Yeah.
like beyond, I guess, designing algorithms or data structures for me, which felt very detached. I got involved in some research projects that were biology and computer science together. So that was mostly bioinformatics or computational biology. And then after a while, that was a bit too fine grained for me. I felt like I could be staring at these, like big genomic files all
Yeah.
day long and like accidentally put in um, a typo and never realize it. And so I was like, I want to do something kind of bigger, more macro scale.
Sure.
So I ended up in graduate school, I ended up proposing this like simulation between like species in an environment and like the world and like kind of interactions between different species in the environment. I had taken some sort of like biological modeling class. It was like a disease vector modeling class, I think, in college. And I was proposing this kind of thing, like a higher level, like how things are interacting with each other and in trying to use my computer science background. So like building a simulation for that kind of thing.
Mhm.
Um, I ended up meeting someone who was interested in this on more of like the human focused level. So it was like how humans are interacting with algorithms and how those things are kind of co-evolving together. And that really started off the first project that I worked on. That was really just like reading about how people understand fairness in algorithmic systems. So that was some of my recourse work, early algorithmic recourse work in applications like loan prediction or loan approval, where I was trying to understand if the model is getting kind of retrained over time and that decision boundary is getting shifted, if that constitutes a moving target for people who are applying to the system, getting rejected, and then applying again. So it was kind of the same like system level dynamics, but happening with different
Yeah.
subjects.
Sure.
Um, and then since then, I've kind of just stayed in it. I don't know. It's not a super active thing, but it's yeah. I think I'm often fascinated by how much like we interact with anything out in the world, but
Mhm.
often technology, and how it shapes our own conceptions of what those things are, what they can do, what we can use them for, and how we're kind of co evolving with those things together. and how to be very intentional about what are the directions that we want to be going in.
Sure. So you mentioned obviously your initial background was in bioinformatics. Was there any other sort of subject that you thought compelled you toward this interdisciplinary approach of using computer science other than just biology?
Um, Subject wise, I mean, I did some history research in high school. Um, we somehow got picked by our by our teacher in high school. Like me and a couple of my friends, they were like, "Hey, you're gonna do an independent study in history," and so we did some really cool stuff
Hmm.
um, with the Harlem Renaissance um, and just looking at like art and poetry and dealing with the politics of what was going on in the south side of Chicago, which is where I was for high school. So I had some exposure to some things like that, but truly, like I did not really get exposed to or I guess I was so focused on STEM that I really didn't spend that much time on so much of the humanities until I ended up working with my postdoc, no, my PhD advisor, who really, his name is David Danks. He sits between kind of philosophy and computer science or data science. And a lot of the big picture questions that I was asking about how do we think about designing these systems in a better way, not just on a technical level, but like at a higher level, like approach wise. Um, he definitely was one of the people who really helped me understand like what does it look like to blend some of these fields together. So I attribute a lot of my kind of like philosophical background and learning to an introductory set of research that I did with him.
Hmm.
And then I'm also now in the Center for Ethics and Society here at Stanford. Um, and that they have like a ton of amazing, social scientists, philosophers, everyone here is so smart. Um, and just being surrounded by a bunch of postdocs who do a lot of philosophy, you also pick up some of that by osmosis and exposure.
I see. Is there
Yeah.
anything in specifics that you thought that you picked up at Stanford that you thought was interesting and relevant to your work?
Um, yeah, so part of my responsibilities as an embedded ethics fellow is to integrate ethics modules into the core computer science curriculum. It's basically founded under this idea that um, as we're often learning technical concepts, there are a bunch of design decisions that we're making that will have basically like ramifications for the values that get embodied in your
Sure.
like resulting kind of piece of technology.
Hmm.
And so at that time is also a time for you to understand like these are not just like simplifying decisions that go into building your homework problem or building kind of like the basic way of formulating your technical problem, but also like important value driven decisions that also need to be grappled with and really critically engaged with.
Sure.
Um, so I think that this
Yeah.
program has really helped me understand like both on the philosophical level and at the computer science level really how much um, computer science and STEM, the way I was raised is that computer science and STEM is very like objective, it's
Yeah.
very like neutral. And I think like the helping build the program and build up modules and work with students has really helped me understand like how much some of these practices like abstraction, like idealization are really like value driven things that we need to engage with and
Yeah.
also help students understand the ramifications of these
Sure.
things.
Yeah, sounds really
Yeah.
cool. So we'll definitely get into some of your work as an embedded
Mhm.
ethics fellow, but for now, let's talk a little bit about um, your research work. So, and your research interests. So, can we begin with a broad overview of what you think ethical AI or safe AI necessarily looks like, and sort of walk us through why that's necessary, and what are sort of the key problems that you've perceived with AI as it's developing?
Okay. So, first of all, these are really big questions, and
Yeah.
they're definitely open research questions. I think the first set of things was what is ethical AI and what is safe AI? Um, these are, I will start with saying they're very big key marketing terms. So, they're often used as by companies to try and convey the valence of the kinds of things or the ethos of things that guide the decisions that
Mm.
they're are in the design process. I think it's to be determined whether the outcome of that process is actually aligned with what the values that they claim them to be.
Mhm.
So, um, there are a bunch of decisions that get made along the way, from picking a problem to designing how you're going to address that problem, and then design or deploying your kind of product out in the world. And you can try to make each of those things, like you can come in it with this idea of like, I want to make a not harmful piece of technology, I want to make a safe technology, I want to make something that's ethical, but that each of those things along the way sometimes get treated as distinct processes, sometimes are things that are influenced by, things beyond this idea of wanting to make something safe. But oh, like we only have enough resources to work to build a minimum viable product, things like that, that are also shaping a lot of the decisions that scope each of these pieces along the way. And so, what ethical and safe AI or technology to me means is something that is we've rigorously like vetted like both through all of three elements of the process, not just what we wanted to do when we were building, but also in embodied values out in the world.
Yeah.
So this means that like when I interact with a piece of technology, there's often a bunch of safeguards around it. So when I drive in my car, if I don't put on a seatbelt, the car will bing and tell me
Yeah.
that I should put on a seatbelt, like really annoyingly, right? And so there are ways in which, like in the beginning, when they first like deployed is not the right word, but they first like built cars and sold them on the market, like they didn't have seatbelts already. And so I think that's kind of some of the stages that we're in.
Okay.
Thinking about like building something, can it do the thing that we want, is a very like kind of engineering STEM perspective of,
Yeah.
oh, we don't really need to worry about all of these other kind of like downstream
Yeah.
ramifications that can come from something. Because we're not at the point of like deploying a product out in the world. We're just seeing like, does the science behind it work? Does the engineering
Mhm.
behind it work? But I think it's often you after you've built something, it's really, really hard to go back to the beginning and say, well, can we critically engage with each of those kind of decisions that went
Yeah.
along the way? It's very hard to go back and change them. So for me, again, what this means is looking at what that means in each parts of the process, trying to refine kind of like the scientific process as a way, or the like the building process in computer science, um, as a way to try and ensure that these values kind of hold true as we're building from start to finish, but also looking at what happens when we deploy it out in the world. A lot of the field of human computer interaction looks at some of this, like we can design something the best we can, and then someone can still use it wrong, or
Yeah.
someone can still like kind of imagine like they can, you could use it wrong, they can use it in the wrong ways, they can think, they can have the wrong takeaways from it. Oh, I should use it for this and this. And I think there's a lot of kind of safeguarding that needs to go around that, so that people better understand and are better calibrated to what are the appropriate uses of these things and what are these things not well designed for.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes, I guess sticking with this analogy of like a seat belt. So what are the
Mhm.
like quote unquote seat belts that you think we need to attach to these models?
So that's a big question too. It's certainly a value, driven one. I think definitely like different people with different perspectives, even within my field, will have different answers.
Hmm.
One of the primary questions that drives a lot of my research is, how do I know what the system is doing? How do I know that what it's doing is aligned with what I want it to do? And then if it isn't aligned with what I want to do, are there ways that I know how to get them aligned again? So I apply at the bank for a loan. They say, yeah, you got a loan. Great. I don't have a problem because I got the loan, right? I go to a bank, I apply, and I get rejected for a loan. Do I know what I need to do in order to change to get the prediction that I want, or the outcome that I want? Um, I think those are kind of some of the key questions that a lot of my work centers around. Like, how do I, like, does this technology actually help me achieve the things that I want to do? And if it doesn't, are there ways that we can forge some of those paths to connect the two things together?
Got it. And what are the ways in which you go about studying this? Like, is it you go like you run simulations or you sort of create thought experiments? What is the research or day-to-day go about approaching these questions actually look like?
Yeah. So I think because I sit in computer science and kind of philosophy together,
Yeah,
it definitely is a mix of some of those things.
sure.
Historically, some of it was kind of simulation based things. So when we really are in cases where we need the counterfactual or we need the simulation of the counterfactual, that's when simulations are great for building those types of things. Other cases are much more, I think, where I use or I like lean more on the both my technical understanding of how the system works and the philosophical analysis of what we really our idealizations of what we want it to work. So breaking that down, it means when we build a piece of technology, we often build a bigger narrative around this is the problem and this is what it solves. But a lot of the time, the technology has made a bunch of simplifying decisions along the way in order to make a really, really complex problem tractable or simple or solvable. And so when I say like I've built a recommender algorithm, it's built on the premise of all of the assumptions built along the way. So it's built on the idea that what I've liked in the past will influence or is likely a good measure for what I will like in the future. And so when we say like what is a perfect recommender system, it's not just basically it means we have to like deeply interrogate this premise of does what I have liked in the past really mean like I will like it in the future? Like someone could make a different recommendation to me. There could be ways in which I don't like view content on a certain site, but I view it on a different site, right? Or like I listen to music on on a variety of different platforms or things like that. And so there are ways in which these kinds of recommendations can be imperfect. And so how do we make sure that um, our aspirations for the system, that it gives me the things that I want, even if I have not indicated at all that I do want them or will want them, that I still have access to them, despite like how sure the system might be about the kinds of
Mhm.
things that I'm interested in. So that's where a lot of like we have like some sort of like technical approximation for some kind of thing that we want in the world. I
Mhm.
want to be able to navigate all of the content out there and to get the things that I, truly am interested in. And then we built an approximation that's like indication based on what we have looked at it or interacted with in the past, or what someone who has looked at similar things to me has looked at in the past to indicate what that might be. But then the philosophy side that comes in is trying to understand like are there ways in which that assumption is not one that always holds true, and if there are like special cases to it, how do we make sure that we're also addressing those cases too?
Got it. So I think this ties into another concept of user agency, which I think is something you've deeply studied. So could you unpack what user agency means in this context of sort of having the model or the system deliver the outcome that you want? Yeah, and just unpack what that necessarily looks like.
Yeah, so I use user agency as an analytical lens for trying to understand what to analyze both what the system technically does and what our kind of philosophical aspirations are for what the system should be doing or what we want the system to be doing. Um, this often comes from a more kind of grassroots approach, which is like anyone can interact with the system and experience friction. They experience some unpleasantness. They experience, oh, I expected this kind of thing to be here and it wasn't.
Yeah.
Um, and so, really, this like kind of universal experience of having friction with the system or frustration or anything like that is really what drives are there ways in which our technical system isn't doing what we want it to do in the ideal sense. um, and so this can happen on what I've touched upon in instrumental ways. So I want the system to give me a certain kind of recommendation and it doesn't. This means I need to instrumentally, I want to be able to give this feedback to the system in order to get the recommendation that I want. I go and follow
Mhm.
certain people, I go and like certain kinds of content, I go whatever, like any kinds of feedback to the system in order for me to physically get the things that I want, right? There are other ways in which these can be shaped, like my agency can be shaped in terms of how I think about the world and how I understand the world, how I plan, getting from point A to point B. Um, and these regard like cognitive and affective states. So the ways in which technical systems are shaping the kinds of content I engage with, the kinds of ideas I interact with, the people that I see out in the world, all these other things about how we understand both the world itself, ourselves, how we relate to each other, um, are ways in which we're influenced by these systems. So if I wish not to be influenced by stereotypes for Asian people because I identify as Asian, are there ways in which I should be afforded more agency in these kinds of things? Like I shouldn't automatically get a generated representation of an Asian person that's always stereotypical, right?
Mhm.
And are there ways that those are shaping the way I think of
Yeah.
myself, feel like I need to act in the world, different things like that. And then finally, like epistemically, it touches on like this is more kind of like philosophy of science, which I'm less seasoned in, but is um, really like how do we determine or validate different kinds of knowledge? So how are technical systems or the way that we build technology rendering certain kinds of knowledge invisible or more kind of like objectively true or more easier to access, all these things like that really shape not only what I touched on before, but also like how we like understand ourselves, how we go about approaching science and knowledge in the world, how we go about validating science, how we go about believing certain kinds of narratives around people's experiences, um, all things like that.
Got it. And so the way I understand it is these are sort of three different axes of sort of ways of refining the output that the system provides. And
Mhm.
three different types of, I guess, content. So I guess along each of these axes, how are they, like, what are the types of problems that do arise in, for example, the epistemic case? Like, what are the epistemic problems that you see that are most prevalent nowadays re regarding the output that systems give?
Um, yeah. So there are definitely, I think a lot of them are intertwined. So some of it has to do with, as I touched on before, with the recommendation, like how people get served knowledge,
Yeah.
how they go about searching for knowledge. So
Mhm.
if I search for a kind of thing, if it's shaped by, some sort of AI summary of these things, um, does that change, my access to the, knowledge in the end? Um, it's it's that. It's also in what we count as let me explain this. Like datafiable, I guess, for lack of a better word. So like things that are measurable, things that are immeasurable. If we switch to a system that is much more based on access through things, like if I Google something and I don't find anything that comes up easily, does that shape my understanding of like, does this not exist? Do we just not know the answer? Or is it just not recorded, just not on the internet? And
Yeah.
I think in a shift to everything being kind of internet based or search based or anything like that,
Sure.
we really risk like losing a lot of some of these like more intangible things or harder to measure things. Obviously, it's a big, big jump to go from just because I couldn't find it on the internet means that it cannot be true or it cannot
Yeah.
exist. Um, but we can see a lot of the erasure of this in even some of the ways in which people are trying to build technical systems now and trying to be really careful about that. So often this falls under the umbrella of low resource languages. Often in trying to build technology like Meta does that traverses many different languages all around the world. And maybe you want the same piece of content to still reach a bunch of different communities all around the world. Like what's funny here could still be funny in other places. And they'll do some sort of translation for these things and dubbing on top of that. But if your language, if my like native language is not available in this like translated system or what the system can translate, it might try and map to the closest or nearest dialect. So this has happened in, I was talking to someone at a conference who was from Africa, and they were talking about some of the dialects from their um, little town specifically. This even happens with like native Taiwanese, which is my background, and a lot of like standard Mandarin being the thing that is used by many, many more people.
Mhm.
And you lose some of the, in the trying to translate over or the presumption that these two things are so easily mapped onto each other. Not that they aren't mappable in some ways, but there are some things that are specific, culturally specific or meaning specific or, word specific that are used in different ways and written in different ways and have different meanings and things like that. So in trying to map those two things together in an effort to make all of this stuff more universal, more accessible, all these things,
Yeah.
you might lose some of the nuance without some kind of like careful building or kind of fine tuning.
Yeah.
So that's ways in which some of the kind of like epistemic sides, so like some of the knowledge, might get lost along the way in rendering certain things invisible, harder to access, um, all these things under this umbrella.
Yeah. So does your research ever spill into like more of the cognitive science aspect of this? Like, do you ever like, or are there experiments out there about studying like maybe, cognitive effects of these AI responses beyond just maybe the
Yes.
theoretical?
Yes. I mean, I would say like the field of AI certainly was actually like originated under cognitive scientists, like people who wanted to build this famed idea of like an artificial intelligence. Now the term really has been co-opted to fall under the umbrella of like,
Yeah.
I used to say I did machine learning and ethics. And now I say I do AI and ethics just because no one ever knows what I say when I say just machine learning, just because they've all been kind of mapped onto each other,
Yeah.
like we were just talking about before, ironically. Um, the question was, sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah. Are there any experiments or results related to like actually recording the cognitive effects on like somebody's brain, for example, when they see like certain output given by like AI models related to representation, etc.
Yeah. So there certainly have been, not by me, unfortunately, because I'm not trained enough to be a
Yeah.
cognitive scientist. But there have been people who have studied creativity in interacting with AI systems. So in a lot of the famed kind of uses of AI, they claim that it's going to make us more creative or make us, have more agency than ever before.
Mm.
And so some people will study the diversity of outputs, I guess either qualitatively or maybe they have a way to do it quantitatively, or they will have people interact with in like have an AI assist them along the way in their creative endeavor and then compare the diversity of the outputs. I remember there was a paper where they said that individually it increased creativity, but collectively reduced the variability. Um, I have to look back more into that paper to see exactly what they meant by that. But there's definitely people who study some of that. And then there's a bunch of stuff where people are worried about lack of critical engagement, uh, the illusion of explanatory depth, some of these other things where it's this idea that, oh, from reading an AI summary, I think I understand something like theoretical physics or something that I truly don't. And I
Yes.
think like, oh, because I understood it, I know how to use it and all these other things. And then, maybe you go into an exam and you're like, oh, actually, I don't know what's how to translate this over to as an applied concept. And
Mhm.
so I think you see this phenomena that I think sometimes a lot of the professors are really trying to figure out how do we reconstruct courses and classes in a way that truly captures the learning that we're trying to get students to go through. Because AI is helping them students do better and better on their homework assignments. But the previous kind of assumption was like, if you get a good grade on your homework assignment, you must have gone through some sort of like positive cognitive process in order to do well. Um, but now that's not necessarily true because people can get so much help on their work.
Yeah.
And it doesn't designate that they have been able to do that independently.
Sure.
So there's been this weird phenomena of like higher homework grades and then lower test performance or like final exam performance, things like that. Um, and then probably there's some stuff on cognitive burden. There's a lot of stuff on attention lately with like social media and everything.
Hmm.
Um, but the difference between, I think, cognition in skimming things and like really deeply reading them and understanding them. I think it's very easy when you're used to seeing like really, really long AI outputs and just
Yeah.
skimming them all to like, get the gist of it. And when that becomes a pattern, like even in my own research, I get very used to skimming papers because I know I'm only reading this paper because I want to find out did they answer this question or how did they answer this
Yeah.
question. It's very directed reading. And that's different from me sitting down to read like a fiction book. I have to like very intentionally, it's like
Yeah.
very, very hard for me if I spend all my time skimming to go and switch and say, like, I'm actually not here to like get through this book as fast as I can. I'm here to like enjoy the story, enjoy the experience, and all of that. So I think there's lots of like ways in which we're still learning how we may be cognitively affected by these kinds of things.
Yeah.
Um, One of my future hopes is like beyond agency, how do we think about empowerment from AI? Does that mean we need to like beyond being understanding the limitations or understanding how to get what we want out of them? How do we use them to empower ourselves to do the things that we truly want? So sometimes people worry about what happens after you get everything you ever wanted. I get access to all of the information that I ever could need. Does that mean like I'm less in touch with the kinds of things that I truly want to learn about? Does everything kind of get rendered flat? When me and my partner are like scrolling through Netflix and there's this kind of like choice paralysis of like, oh, I don't want to watch that and you don't want to watch this, versus like when my family's on like vacation and like we were like in a hotel room and it has like three channels and there's like a movie on. We're just gonna watch the movie and we're gonna enjoy it. Like
Yeah.
it's yeah. It's a little bit about that. What happens when we get this kind of like unfettered access to information or the ability to run any experiment, like without having to worry about all of the friction. Like there's a process, there's a way in which that process of choosing like what is the right research question, what is the right way to approach that research question, that I think we need to be very careful about protecting and
Yeah.
making sure that we're doing them in very like kind of the right way, I guess.
Yeah. Do you think these impacts are limited or like unique more or less to AI, or is it just about the development of technology and the internet in general? Or yeah, like what percentage do you think AI
Oh,
contributes to
that's a good
these
question.
impacts?
I guess one of the ways that I would go about trying to answer that question is like to pick some sort of like analogous thing.
Hmm.
So often I will say like did we completely lose the ability to um, do laundry when we got like a
Yeah.
washing machine?
Yeah.
Like probably not. Like it just changed the way that we moved around these things. Um, For AI, I think it really depends on a lot of what I would call like what many people call like the socio-technical changes. So the changes within society, the social changes and the kind of social structures and institutions, and then how we think about work, how we think about learning and all these other things. So I think there's a way in which like we can like I'm definitely not like an AI doomer where I think like it's gonna make us all like Wally and everything like that. But I think we just have to be really careful about the ways in which we still try and like motivate learning and motivate truly like understanding this stuff within our own kind of brains and for ourselves. I think about when I was in school, like having a really hard time with, but a calculator exists. Why do I have to learn
Yeah.
this math? And so I think it's really about if AI is a tool, how do we make sure that the tool is only helping us in the ways that we want to be helped, and not also simultaneously shaping us in ways that like making us dependent in ways that we don't want. Um, Ironically, there I work with some older individuals. Like I work on a project that's about basically like trying to build like fall detection kind of like sensing technology for older individuals, and there's a lot of fear in dependence on technology and that relationship between dependence or reliance and independence or capability. And I think about the same thing. What do we really want out of um, the process of science or the process of doing things or work? Is it just to produce something of value? Or is it also the sense of achievement that you get at the end of the process from having done that stuff yourself? Right. So I think we need to think a lot about what are the institutional incentives and then what are the personal incentives for trying to do different
Hmm.
kinds of endeavors. Um, but certainly, like, beyond like does it mean less if I get AI to help me write this paper? Does it
Yeah.
mean less if it really depends on like what that process is like, right? If it's like a truly collaborative process, or if it's something where I feel like I have, like less ownership over this thing or less understanding of it, or I feel like less empowered by this, I think that's something to really deeply grapple with.
Mm. And do you think, like historically, I guess, have there been tools that have reached this magnitude of like how important they are in shaping how society functions, or do you think this is truly unprecedented? Like, I remember when AI came
Um,
out a couple years ago,
yeah.
like my dad said, like, oh, it'll be fine. Like we had calculators come out when I was in like fifth grade, and people are still doing like math and stuff. So, but
Yeah.
it like, and it seems like that can't be true, right? Like there has to be something in like unique this time. But at the same time, I'm sort of struggling to come up with an answer about like what is unique this time.
Um, I probably can't give the most satisfying answer, um, mostly because I wasn't alive experientially to live through all of these things in the past, so I can't tell exactly what that means. I know it certainly feels like that it's happening on a scale and rate that feels very unprecedented and
Yeah.
feels very kind of like fear-inducing or destabilizing.
Hmm.
Um, this is just purely my speculation. I would say a lot of people worry about like the end of work or the end of,
Yeah.
my job and all these other things. And I feel like a lot of people will often reference like the Luddites, which are like these anti-technology groups um, in the past that were really protesting the building of these like big loom machines that were replacing like the handmade ways that people were making clothes and textiles. Um, I think often it's cognitively easier. This is all my folklore and my beliefs. It's cognitively easier to imagine one day have job, one day no job. One day, like we have grocery store, one day we have AI grocery store. Like it's very, I think it's very easy to think about that and then get like scared about
Yeah.
that. Um, but I think that like it's a lot harder to think about how will the way that I do my job change, or how will the way that I get rewarded for my job change. And I think that is just like requires a lot more cognitive effort. I think I haven't at least come across a lot of things where people are engaging with that kind of set of possibilities. It's we just haven't. I think some people have spent a lot of time thinking about like what does this happen in a super AI future
Yeah.
or a super technology forward future. But I think from the day to day person, it's very hard to imagine like even when I grew up, like I didn't grow up really with smartphones. I grew up with phones that had physical keyboards, and so like and I was also kind of against like an iPhone. Like there was an iPod touch that was out that basically kind of did the same thing, and I couldn't imagine like something that does all of the things it does now. It has an amazing camera, and we talk to people whenever we want, and we play all these games on it, and like all these things that you can do on it. You can even use like your iPhone for like lidar based stuff and mapping out a room, all these kind of crazy things. Um, but I think it was very hard for me to imagine that like smartphones are the future, right? And how are they going to change the way we interact with each other, the way we move around the world, the way I can't leave a place without my phone? It's like really essentially on me all the time. And so I think there are a bunch of things that are going to have to move the way that we, or shift the way that we kind of like imagine doing work, and the way that AI is the kind of the role that AI has in that piece or in that function. Um, but back to your question about whether this is something that's completely unprecedented or like fundamentally different. Um, Probably, I guess my opinion is like not to the extent that a lot of these AI hype machines have said
Yeah.
so. I think we need to figure it out. I think it's very hard because it feels like a lot of companies are responding to it
Yeah,
in ways that feel far beyond our control.
definitely.
But we've seen them respond in ways that where they lay off a bunch of people and then they have to walk it back because they
Yeah.
can't meet all of the demands of the day-to-day tasks that they still need to complete. So I would just be very careful to assume that it's certainly really extremely one direction. But I certainly have been proven wrong before. Humans are historically or famously bad at extrapolating things for the future. So perhaps it is, and I'm just kind of skeptical. Um, but I think that's still yet to be determined.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, so I guess we can just move on to my last topic, unless I can think of something else after that. So I just
Mhm.
wanted to talk about your role in the embedded ethics role that you have. So could you
Mhm.
just provide an overview of what that means and what exactly do you do in some of the projects that you've been working on?
Sure. So I touched on it a bit earlier,
Yeah.
but the embedded ethics program, I think, originally started at Harvard. They have their own embedded ethics program, but Stanford also has their own. That's not trademarked, I think, or maybe trademarked in a different way. Um, and the idea is that in computer science, it's such a young field that unlike some of these other, older engineering fields, we don't have that ring that you get at the end of graduation that's reminding you of that bridge that fell, that was designed badly, and like these are deep tragedies, and we really have to think about, the ramifications of our research or design choices or whatever in the world. So I think there's a lot of this oft ethos of like what move fast and break things like that.
Yeah.
And so there isn't a lot of like, oh, but what does it mean? Like, can we build better technology slower? Does it have
Yeah.
to be fast? Does it have to be, taking the world by storm? Does it have to be making tons of money right away? Like all these other things, deeply popular. Um, the the embedded ethics program is centered around helping students trying to understand that all of the choices they're making every day are ethical choices already. That without them, and I attribute that to David Diggs, who is my graduate school advisor. It's not my, original idea. He's the best. Um, but it's this idea that everyone is practicing ethics already. We're practicing it when we choose to buy a certain thing. We practice it when we choose to drive by a gas powered car, like all these other things. These are things we practice in our everyday life. And it feels really overwhelming to try and engage with it on every single decision that we make. But that, particularly in computer science, which a lot of the conceptual foundations, like even around abstraction, which is this idea that like if you build some sort of functionality, so a function that translates an input to an output, that you can apply it to any piece of data, any data set, any application, without having to worry about this and that. But I think the point of the embedded ethics program is really that you should be really careful, actually, about the things that you input and output in the systems and the way you just plug and play these things out in the world. Like one of the famously powerful things about computer science is like you can apply it to anything. You could apply it anywhere out in the world. You can apply it to like data in this way and data in that way. Anything that you can turn into data, really. And the program is really like, but there are a bunch of like value driven choices that are made along the way. So in picking the problem, in picking the data set, it's not just about picking like whatever I can find that's a free data set that I can download on the internet, but like, does this data set have some sort of information that makes me think that it would be good to apply towards this problem?
Mhm.
And that's really what we're hoping for students to get exposed to and engage with in the classroom as they're learning these concepts. So it's not just, wow, I learned all of this powerful things I can do in computer science. And here's this like soft ethical stuff that like is not really my problem because that's for legislators to
Yeah.
decide. Like the law will tell me when I shouldn't do this, or like that's for, the public to tell me like they all go out and deeply protest my product and then I decide like actually this is a bad idea. Right? There's a bunch of decisions actually in which I don't think that people are like inherently nefarious or malicious or
Yeah.
like want to do something that's fundamentally exclusive towards like minority populations or anything. um, but a lot of my work really centers around this idea off, I guess, my belief that we are all shaped by all of these institutions, even in ways in which we are advantaged by them in some ways and disadvantaged in others. um, and so this means that like even though was not like personally responsible for like all of the bads in the past historically, um, it also might be my intention not to repeat them. or not to intentionally make entrench them or reify them kind of
Yeah,
in the product that I built in the future.
sure.
Um, so it's really helping students to at least engage with some of these things, understand how even unintended choices can be made in ways that have these downstream ramifications. I think it's really, really hard to grapple with because it's hard to tell students, like, and here's a bunch of values and the consequences that you should be aware of, and then not give them like a nice little like bundled, like, this is a best practice thing that you should do. Um, that's really, really uncomfortable to sit with. That's really not fun, especially in a world that's really optimized for ease,
Yeah,
right? Like I open my phone and instantaneously it's giving me content. Um, when we're trained to really like get something as fast as possible or as soon as possible, or instant gratification, honestly why I got into computer science in the beginning, like instant gratification of knowing my code works, um, it's really uncomfortable to sit with like an ethicist telling you all the time like the answer is it depends, right? Like that's not fun to interact with. It's not even fun to like have your big brain idea and then for someone to tell you like, but this could be used in a bad way,
yeah,
like maybe we shouldn't build it, right? So that's like a really, really hard dynamic. But I think it's hoping to reorient around this idea that these people who have studied some of these ways in which historical bads have happened are not trying to tell you like, oh, you're a bad person because you didn't think of this, but trying to say like, are there better ways? Are there kind of like, is there some set of like possibilities? Are there some ways of like making the problem like a bit richer, or thinking about the solution space as a bit richer, that helps you like better engage with this ideal goal of what you have from your piece of technology or your system?
yeah.
I think there's a bunch of different strategies in which people try and go about doing this.
Hmm.
Some of them are like, we build the minimum viable product and then we try and capture all of the other
Yeah.
audiences that are not, falling under there. Um, that's one way. I would say another one is, how do we make sure that more people, like, it is that we're capturing kind of the universal, if that exists, like the universal kind of like aims of this system. So like everyone wants to get the piece of content that they want, everyone wants to be able to be approved of the loan, or everyone wants to um, be able to create the content that they want to create, that they conceived of in their mind. And does that mean that our original approach is relying on something that it shouldn't be, that instead is not quite capturing the more generalizable thing? So I do believe that there's like some truth in the world. There are some like not universal truths, but like things that are like truly causal, I guess, of these outcomes out in the world. Um, but that it's often really, really hard to like know exactly what those things are. And so it's much easier or easy to rely on the proxies or the heuristics or all these other things. And that if we truly care about building this underlying causal thing, truly understanding the world in its essence of how things are related to each other and how things kind of co-evolve there together, um, that's really at the crux of building technology that is accessible to many different people, and that we're all the better off for it, really.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And so is it that this program is the primary objective to instill these values in like coursework for undergrads? Is that the way you go about doing this? Got it. And so
Yes. Yeah.
so like what courses or projects have you specifically worked on, I guess, just out of curiosity?
Yeah. So me and usually two other postdocs work on the entire set of core major classes or requirements in the undergraduate computer science curriculum major. Um, so this means like from the really introductory classes all the way up to some of the higher level classes that are more specialized, like um, natural language processing, or kind of the intro AI courses, things like that. We're integrated in creating content across all of those courses.
Got it.
Um, in the intro level, it's more like, what is bias? Where does it come from? What are ways in which systems might be propagating bias in ways that we didn't expect? what are ways in which people define different kinds of fairness? So we all say we want a system to be fair. We all say we want a system to be safe or trustworthy or
Yeah.
ethical. What does that mean when you can define it a bunch of different ways?
Hmm.
Um, and often those ways are incompatible with each other, right? So how do we choose them in a ways that are at least transparent to other people so they can choose the thing that they want?
Yeah.
And some of the higher level ones, they have a little bit more to do with the domain specific things that people are studying. So some of my work has been in content moderation.
Mhm.
So in the NLP class, they will do like a toxicity prediction content modifier kind of assignment. And one of the exceptions to this is often like, well, what about language reclamation? So the word queer was often used historically pejoratively, so like in a put down way. Um, and that means like probabilistically, like 90% of the time or more, queer was used negatively. So we're going to pick a probability, we're going to use that to predict whether the future case, someone using the word queer, is going to be toxic or not. And if you use that probability to translate it forward, it's actually changed a lot, right? The distribution has changed since then. People have used it. People have reclaimed this language to be a self-identifying piece of language. And so, are there ways in which we need to build our systems to be flexible or to be context specific or sensitive to some of these exceptions? Obviously, there are still people in the world who will use this word negatively, and other people in the world who will use it positively or use it to self inoculate themselves against the negative uses of the term. And so, how can we then try and build systems that catch some of those kind of edge cases or different cases? Some of the other stuff in some of the other AI courses that I've worked in have been low resource languages, open source, closed source, decisions like that for foundation models or fine tuning. And then I touched on a little bit before in the algorithms course, we do some things about trying to help students understand decisions made along the way to design an algorithm. You have to define like a very easy to answer kind of problem or something you can satisfy with like an algorithm that like is readable, basically. And practices like abstraction and idealization are ways in which you simplify the problem down into something that's like bite-sized, but that each of those things are still things that can become hairy once you put them out in the world and deploy your kind of algorithm out in the world. So all of these things are available. Most of our content is available on the Embedded Ethics website. So the hope is not just the students at Stanford can benefit from these, but people who don't have, or professors and teachers who don't have the resources to, or the expertise to engage with a lot of these kind of ethical issues and problems can also benefit from these resources that we are creating. But I think for me personally, quite selfishly, I have benefited a lot as someone who was like, I guess, raised in computer science from really engaging with like the long legacy of philosophers who've also been in this program. Katie Creel is famously one of the kind of like original people in the program. Um, some of the professors now at Stanford have been postdocs in the program. And I think it's really helped me like beyond believing that philosophy was a great way for me to analyze the way that we formulate problems and the solutions that we pose
Hmm.
as the solutions against them was something that like often like if you only interact with computer scientists like I did in maybe parts of my undergrad, and then I come and I will say like I only care about like what is the takeaway from this, what are the actionable things that we do, what does this say about like what the answer should be, is very different than a lot of philosophical approaches, and honestly why I um, was probably a bit like scared about philosophy in the past. I felt like it didn't reach some sort of like tangible conclusion, but I think it's a very computer sciencey perspective. I would say, not trying to slander computer science, but like it was it was a very computer sciencey perspective to be posed a question and then like want there to be an answer that is like clean and um, we can analyze it for its like correctness. Like there some of the ways that like mathematical proofs are often very clean. Um, and so I think learning how to analyze some of these kind of like common practices in computer science and see them as not truly like not objective practices, but ones that have been shaped by the discipline in the field and the way that the discipline moves out in the world, um, as important things to engage with and grapple with and really help inform how students are raised within the discipline
Yeah.
and what they think it's good for and how they see their skills not only valued by companies, but what kinds of empowering for the kinds of impacts that they want to make on the world.
Yeah. So what has been the response from these students? Like obviously startup culture is like really strong in like Bay Area
Yeah.
and of course Stanford. So has that tension been has that tension come up, I guess? And have like what sort of approaches have you taken to maybe offer this nuance?
Um, yeah, I would say it's pretty mixed. Um, There are some students who are like, this is great. I would love to hear more about it. They're
Yeah,
the type of students who will kind of like fall down the rabbit hole and keep learning about some of these things independently.
sure.
There are students who are kind of like, I guess there's like a bell curve. There's like students who are really in the middle, 90%, who are like, yeah, it's great to learn some of these things. I'm not sure exactly how they'll kind of manifest out in the world yet. But, I'm here and I learned it. And then there are some students who are like really at the tail of this bell curve on the other side that are like, this was stupid and I didn't need to engage with this at all. I have a piece of work that's coming out soon, actually in a couple of weeks, with one of the rising scholars in the center. His name is Louis Ortiz. Um, that's really about like how do we try and capture all of these students
Hmm.
in trying to make some of these concepts not like politically heavy or politically driven to ostracize some of those students,
Yeah.
and really like inclusive or accessible for everyone.
Yeah.
So it's often driven by this idea that I guess my belief, and also like Maya Angelou's and many other, amazing scholars before me, belief that like I am not free unless everyone around me is free, and that I'm constantly shaped by these institutions that are oppressive or liberative in these other ways, in you know unfair ways or not kind of equal ways across everyone. And so trying to make a lot of these ethical concepts or the ramifications of ethical decisions um, salient to these students, regardless of whether they feel like they're in a privileged position or
Yeah.
not. So beyond us always saying like who is harmed by technology, minority students, marginalized students, XYZ, like I I can still be affected by a system that has presumed generality when should be more specific. So, like one of the examples we use is that a formulation or a problem formulation or an ethical module that's often centered around highlighting marginalized communities, just as like the real world like historical ramifications justification can be when trans people go to the airport, they trans people are often disproportionately flagged by a lot of these body scanner pieces of technology because they have non-normative, like physical attributes. And this can be because I'm transitioning. This can be because my body has weird proportions. This can be because XYZ. Like someone thinks that I'm a man and they put that on the scanner, and then the scanner says, oh, you don't look like the average man. And then, something comes out. Then I get scanned extra. So it's often formulated as like, this can be harmful if we don't care about trans people. And this is really like hinging on like people buying into the like why we should protect trans people, which side note, we should. Um, but like there's also a way in which you could formulate this kind of problem to make it accessible to anyone who doesn't fall within the really restrictive norms of what a man should look like and what an average woman should look like is going to be negatively affected by this system.
Hmm.
Oh, like my torso's longer than proportionally should be to my legs. Oh, I, wore a jacket or I wore shoes that have risers in them. I have a more plus size body. I have an extra skinny body. Like all of these other things are ways in which the same system can enforce these norms on every single person in the world.
Yeah.
And I don't know anyone who like maybe there's like some person in the world who falls into this like perfect average, everything, perfect normal person. But I really don't think anyone is. And I think
Yeah.
everyone in one way or another, if you believe like, uh, I guess, what does the average person's attributes even look like across like a multi-ethnic society? Who knows? But basically, this idea that like everyone actually can be suffering under a system that applies some like average norm. Who knows if that exists even in one person, let alone everyone,
Yeah.
and whether deviation from that norm really should be the standard of how we evaluate like likelihood of security risk or other things like that. So, trying to reformulate some of these things, not that the historical harms are something to be erased or should not be acknowledged. They certainly should be and have their place in the classroom to help students understand like these have real
Yeah.
ramifications. But that's not the only tool we have in the toolbox. That there are ways in which we can try to make compelling to students, like, oh, the way that I engage with the like school's question course, Canvas or whatever, that platform, the way it's not intuitive for me can also be not intuitive for someone else. Or the way in which the system malfunctions for me can also, malfunction for other people. And that all of these ethical practices that we're trying to help arm students with are not like, I'm not designating which values you have to have, just that it's worth thinking about them along the way.
Got it. So do you think you could give us like a sneak peek on like I guess what are these strategies that you've come up with in this paper that you alluded to sort of approach this more general way of reaching like a variety of students, I guess.
Yeah, I mean it's just what I said, basically, which is that you go from narratives that only cite the historical harms or only cite the really famous harms, to ones that are accessible experiences for most of your students. So I guess even at my undergraduate institution, we had a platform called Sakai, but I guess more what students use now is like Ed or Canvas, and uh, everyone has to use that because everyone in the classroom needs to access the course materials. And if you're not, maybe we should be really worried about you. But that being said, like, can you build like ways in which you can turn some of the computer science curriculum that you're trying to teach students into universal experiences that all of them have access to. So build things around, hey, like when you use Canvas, like, are there any issues that you have with this? How does that help us understand what kinds of design decisions that got made by the people who are building these systems? Are there ways in which when I'm designing a homework question for you and you misinterpret it in one way or another, or you don't understand, like I'm implicitly hoping that you'll reference certain concepts, that these are ways in which students might get left behind, students might get excluded, and you worry about like, is it fair to penalize some of these students who, failed to understand that um, specific concepts or what should have been invoked in a certain homework question or certain kind of response? And trying to build around some of these more classroom universal experiences is really what we're hoping um, to be a little bit more effective to reduce some of these things like distancing or disengagement with some of these like ethical challenges.
Sure. So I know we've talked about this a little bit, but do you think you have any like advice, I guess, for younger people that are to help them gain notice of, the ethical nuance related to technology, for example, um, especially like as, AI and technology is more and more used by younger and younger people in middle school and even elementary school. Like, how would you advise them or maybe their parents of going about ensuring that the technology is used correctly in a sense?
Um, yeah, good question. I would say for parents, I'm probably not the best. I
Yeah,
don't have like, the answer for parents.
yeah, sure.
I do not envy parents trying to raise kids in a world that like, Cocomelon exists and other things like that. Um, I, I mean, I even understand like how easy it is to have that cognitive crutch of like, I have a lot of external pressures to complete this job, to finish this homework assignment, and I don't feel like I have the resources to to do that. And so a lot of the ways in which AI often is posed as like the answer to these things for students,
Yeah.
um, that's a really, really hard challenge. Like I had a parent say to me once, her kid has no interest in reading because it's not as sensory stimulating as like being on TikTok is, because there's like visual and there's auditory and there's, this and that and all these like attention, gimmicks.
Yeah.
And she was like, I cannot convince my kid that reading is like a more pleasurable experience when you get to like imagine all these things in your head and like go at the pace that you're going at and all these other things. So she was proposing to me that like we use generative AI to like make, you know, like movie adaptations of reading and stuff. And I was like, oh, I was so scared for her. I was like, please no. Because we worry about all of the simplifying ways
Yeah.
in which generative decisions are maybe choosing biased or stereotypical ways to make some of those decisions or insatiating people in the world. Like for me, like the lovely experience of reading a book is like, maybe they make a movie adaptation and like someone else's interpretation of how the story goes, how characters look, how they act, or how they're emoting is completely different. And maybe that can be really frustrating, but maybe it can be, kind of perspective opening to see that from the same, thing, many things can come out of it. So for parents, I'm sure that's a really, really hard question about how to protect your kids. I knew kids growing up whose parents didn't even let them like watch TV or anything. So I don't know if that's one way. There's a bunch of like kind of external worries about like, will my child get left behind if this is like an important skill they need to use in order to, be competitive in the job market in the future. Um, Again, probably an unsatisfying answer, but the typical answer of an ethicist is like, it depends. It depends on how we, build AI as, an essential thing or something you have to have certain kinds of skills for. But I'm sure by the time, like 10, 20 years from now, like we will have stabilized some of the ways in which we say, like, this is the best way to use it, or this is the ways, these are the kinds of skills that you need to have for engaging with this type of system. So
Mhm.
I would say I wouldn't worry too much about being left behind. I guess my personal beliefs is I wouldn't worry too much about it just yet. Um, Engaging with these kinds of ethical things. The call that I often give to younger people, old people too, like everyone. Every time I get in an Uber, people are asking me about AI ethics, and so sometimes I'm scared to even tell people that I study it. Um, is is It's what do you want out of AI systems? Everyone talks about how AI systems are going to do that. They're going to do this. They're going to change the way that I get to work. They're going to change the way that I write my paper. They're going to like do all these other things. And it's often promised as um, the thing that's supposed to empower you the most. And the thing that I often ask students, ask anyone who's like asking me about all these things is what do you want from AI? Do you want AI to help you in a very particular way? Do you want it to help you reach these sort of goals because you want to build a website and you want to have your Etsy business and you want to be an artist, but you don't want to worry about all the business side? Like, think about all of the ways in which you want this technology to make your life better and don't forget them, basically. Like, when I interact with like a cell phone, it's very different than the way like my grandma interacts with a cell phone, because I have this learned relationship with it of these are the things it can do and these are the things it can't do. I would never use my phone as a football, but maybe someone else who really wants football would use it in that way, right? Or something like that. A very silly example. But I think it's very easy for us to, once we start to like interact with a piece of technology, um, become very narrow and very concrete. And these are the things that it can't do. These are the things that it can do. And there's nothing wrong with having a better understanding of what the system can and can't do. But I think in the way that AI is often pushed in the world, I worry a lot about this disengagement of how do I demand the things that I want from AI technology? If we're going to insist that AI is making TV scripts and movies and all these other things out in the world, How do I make sure that it's representing me in the ways that I want?
Hmm.
How do I make sure that the things that I'm imagining, the characteristics that I think are important for media or technology or anything, are represented in that? And I think being really cognizant of that is one of the first steps to then, working with people to build the technology that you want, or calling for companies to really support some of these fundamental rights and protections and affordances that we should have. And it often, I'm sure it feels unsatisfying to be like, oh, what do I want from technology? Everyone's just pushing AI on me, right? Like, I don't know what I want from it. But I think this kind of friction that I talked about before is one of the most human things. Oh, I thought this thing was going to be like this, and then it wasn't, right? So, how can we use that as a signal for, hey, like this system wasn't built for me and should be built better? Not the system was built and it doesn't do the thing I want and I need to learn it better, but also that, like, there are many ways in which we are like in the earlier stages of this technology and informing policy and shaping what the things we allow it to do out in the world without superhuman supervision or with human supervision. I drive down the street and there's like a Waymo that's going along right beside me, and like, do we want these things to be out in the world? Do we want to build legal structures around like who is to blame when bad things happen? Um, it's really important for people to not just kind of passively go, oh, this is just how it is. This is just the things that it can do, because I think a lot about who that benefits, right? Is it to my advantage to only learn how the system works? Or is it to my advantage also to say, this is how it is and this is how it could be, or this is how it should be? Um, so that's often the thing that I would love to hear people be more active about. There's a lot of I think intuitions that people have about being deceived by AI, like even when they interact with, AI generated videos of like silly animal things and stuff on the internet. But this feeling of like being deceived, of like, I thought I was better and then I got tricked. What does that mean about what kind of transparency, what kind of watermarking, what kind of, prohibitions we should have for helping people be more aware of the kind of content that they're interacting with, in order to protect them against what kinds of like conclusions we make based on a video that we see.
Okay. So I won't take any more of your time. I think we can wrap up the episode around here. So
Uh-huh.
thank you so much, Dr. Chen, obviously, for your insight and your time. We've gone a little over here, but I definitely learned a lot, and I'm sure our audience did too.
Thank you so much. It's been a privilege chatting with you.
Great.